Hey, Heather. Heather, can you check in? I saw you pop up.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
All right, it being 6:30, I'll call the meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education to order. It's Monday, January 25th, 2021. We are meeting via Google Hangouts and conference calls. Katie, could you call the meeting or call the roll, please?
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Here.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Present, board has a quorum. I've seen the notice or proof that the the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin open meetings law. We'll need to approve the agenda as posted. In terms of action items, we have consideration of open enrollment spaces, a revisit of high school winter athletic competition, and acceptance of the 2021-24 audit proposal. And then informational items, we're going to talk about Worth Woods and the Environmental Center. Tim and I met with Leslie on that. And then our return to school update and equity update from Dr. Bergstrom. So that's the agenda as posted. I would need a motion to approve that agenda.
This is Anna. I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
Tim,
This
second.
is Heather. I'll second.
Tim's in with the second. All in favor of approval of the agenda signify by saying aye.
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 Oh, actually, we need a roll call. Sorry about that.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun? I'm sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Zach. Sorry, Mr. Zach.
Yes. Okay, we have an agenda. Consent calendar is item A. Is there any individual who wishes anything to be removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I need a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar.
I'll move. This is Heather.
Heather with the motion, is there a second?
This is
I'll
Anna.
second.
I'll second.
With the second, we have a motion and a second. I will note we have one retirement. Kristen Radcliffe, who is a reading interventionalist at Brooklyn, is retiring after 30 years. So we thank her for her service and wish her the best in her retirement. And then we have 4 donations, one from the Oregon Brooklyn Lions Club in the amount of $1,500 for the Lions Scholarship. And then Irene, Carla, and Dwayne Draper have each donated $225 or $300 for the Draper Family Scholarship, which is a long-standing scholarship in honor of Manly Draper, who was a longtime Oregon school board member. So we thank the Lions Club and the Draper family for their continued support of the district. With that, Katie, call the roll for approval of the items on the consent calendar.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motions on the consent calendar are approved. Information items B, comments received from the public regarding agenda items. While we're meeting remotely, public participation through our comment period will be by email, submitted to Katie Heights by 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting, and limited to 250 words. And then we read them in order that they are received. And I think we have 4 of them tonight, and Krista's going to do the honors tonight. Krista, proceed.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Dear members of the school board and administration, thank you all for making tough decisions and sacrificing so much of your time in order to make our school district and community a better place. I may not always agree with every decision you make, but I very much appreciate your work nonetheless. What is currently unfolding on social media is shocking. Watching a group of people hiding behind a local Facebook page go after individual members of the current school board with personal attacks and shaming is disturbing. The bullying on display is sad and a discredit to our community. I would like you to know that my family is grateful for your work, continued efforts, and commitment to move the OSD community forward. Sincerely, Andrea Bilo. Dear Dr. Bergstrom and members of the Oregon School Board, I want to say how proud I am of our administration and school board for the difficult decisions that have come up in this unprecedented pandemic. I do not agree with all the decisions that have been made around school and sports in the pandemic, and I am impressed with the integrity with which these decisions have been handled. As a parent in this district, I am deeply disappointed with the way a particular group on Facebook has made Anna's brave vote with her conscience about sports reopening into a reason to attack her and her family in a public forum. I find this behavior disappointing and disturbing. I want you all to know how thankful my family is for the work you all pour into our schools, and I commit to working towards a community where we focus on forward motion and future plans rather than attacking people doing good work in a hard situation. Thank you all. Coral Rose Joplin. Dear members of the Oregon School Board and OSD administration, I see the human side and personal sacrifice you put into your thoughtful decision-making process at every public meeting. We all know you put in much more behind the scenes. One thing I've heard the majority of people in this district say is that they live here for the schools. We have a remarkable administration who is thoughtful, well-equipped, and empathetic. We are not where we should be, and I think everyone can agree to that, but forward is the only direction we should be moving. This past week has been really sad to see personal attacks in our community on social media directed at community members, administrators, and sitting school board members. This is not the Oregon any of us wants. This kind of behavior should never be tolerated. Asking for accountability is much different than attacking someone personally. This is the kind of bully behavior we should be teaching our kids not to engage in. I'm sorry some of you have had to endure what you have. Sincerely, Dana Cobernews. Dear Oregon School Board members, as a parent and district resident, I am very concerned about the recent decision by the Oregon School District Board to allow winter sports athletes to compete against other schools outside of Dane County following strict protocols for COVID-19 and strongly encouraging 2, but allowing up to 4 spectators per athlete. This decision violates the spirit and intent of the Dane County Public Health Order, which was extended through February 10th. First, I'd like to point out that any precautions taken to prevent the spread of COVID-19 while at an indoor in-person event with people outside your household do not make you safe. They can only make you safer than if you hadn't taken the precautions. The only way to guarantee stopping the spread is to stay home. Although most children have mild or no symptoms, some children with underlying health issues possibly unknown at the time may be more susceptible to contracting, suffering complications from, or even dying from COVID-19. Teenagers who play competitive sports, even with precautions taken, can contract and spread the virus to others. There is risk associated with every school sporting event under this new winter sports policy. Second, I am shocked that Ms. Bijak's proposal amendment to the motion that student athletes would be required to be virtual students until 2 weeks after their last game did not even receive a second. While I am sure that Dr. Bergstrom has implemented strong protocols to minimize the spread of COVID among the in-person students, nothing except staying home will guarantee stopping the spread. Although students may not be as susceptible to getting or spreading COVID, the teachers and staff are more vulnerable. Allowing student athletes to have close contacts through competitive sports and then allowing them to come back to in-person schooling seems counterintuitive. Playing sports is a privilege. If parents and students wish to make that choice and take that risk for themselves, fine. But they should also do their part to make sure any COVID spread stops with them by attending virtual classes from home. We owe it to the other non-athlete students and especially to the dedicated teachers and staff of our district who have not been given the option to stay home. Lastly, I am perhaps most bothered by the message this is sending to our children. Some parents don't like or agree with the public health Madison-Dane County order, so they found a way to subvert it. In a global pandemic, an order designed to stop the spread of a horrible disease was circumvented because some parents feel that their children's need to play competitive sports is more important than following the spirit and intent of a public health order. We could argue about the validity of the order and what the current statistics and medical studies show, but at the end of the day, this feels like cheating to me. And I don't think that's what we should be teaching our children. This is literally a life and death issue. Many of us know someone who has died from COVID-19. I strongly urge the board to keep this in mind and reconsider their votes on the recent winter sports policy. Let's make sure the Oregon School District can look back with pride at how we behaved and where we stood when this is all done. Sincerely, Amanda Peterson. That's it.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everyone who submitted those emails for our consideration tonight. Next on our agenda is OEA report, and I think I saw Laura sign on. Anything tonight, Laura?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Okay, student report, and I saw Chloe and Andrew. Guys, you're up.
Yes, so as mentioned in some of the letters, winter sports have been going on. You all are aware of that. I have spoken with many of the athletes, and they are just overwhelmingly excited to be playing. I'm friends with a lot of the boys basketball players who just cannot express how happy they are just to be back on the court, even if they do have to wear masks, which can be an annoyance to some players in the middle of competition, but they don't really care. They're just happy to be playing, happy to be supporting Oregon on the front of their jerseys. Other than that, I think Chloe has some more information about like freshmen and coming into the high school, so I'll hand it off to her.
Great. Hi, Chloe.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Just to continue the student report, OHS students are currently in their second week of semester 2, getting acclimated to their new classes. Next week, there's also a few different things going on, including course selections for the new year for freshmen through juniors, as well as a building tour going on all day on Wednesday, so the freshmen can kind of get ready for this phased in that will take place in February, as well as some extra connections synchronous classes next Thursday and Friday, which will go over all of the safety precautions and rules that are new. So that should be good. Everyone will be ready to phase back into the building.
Great. Thank you for your work and help on that, Andrew and Chloe, with that. So Andrew tells me that next meeting, he's going to have a shirt which would indicate his choice. Chloe, have you decided what's up for next year?
I haven't decided yet.
Okay. Keep us updated. So we see you wearing a particular shirt of a institution, we'll know you've made your decision. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. That takes us to action items C. First one is 21-22 open enrollment spaces. Leslie, is this yours or Gina's?
Gina will be speaking tonight.
Okay, go ahead, Gina.
All right, so the purpose of my report tonight is to have the board take action on setting the number of spaces for the acceptance of open enrolled students for the 21-22 school year. So just to remind everybody, by state law, we have to set the number of spots tonight. We can always open more spots in June if they are available, but once we set the spots tonight, we cannot lower them. So with that in mind, wanted to explain really how we make this recommendation. So we always look at our class size guidelines and we try to stay within those as best possible, which is 22 students, K-3, and then 25 students in grades 4 through 12. And we also look at the needs of our students for special education programming. DPI does give us guidelines for what they think are the recommended caseloads. So we do look at that as well. We take a look in terms of kindergarten at our historical enrollment because we know we have a lot of students who register for kindergarten in the summer. So we take a look at our historical data as well. In addition, and this is a function of board policy, but once our students are accepted here in open enrollment, they don't need to apply again. So we make sure that they are included in our numbers as well. So this year is a little unique because we know that due to COVID that we had some movement in our district for families who chose to go to a different district or even homeschool. But we are really encouraged. And in fact, Jen Hansen talked today that we do have some families that have told us that they're coming back to us in the fall. So we wanted to make sure that we had room for them as well and still included those resident students in our numbers. So then we really talked about what does this fall look like? And what do we think is in the best interest of our students? And really in looking at our students and not sure what this spring will bring, we do anticipate growth this spring. Interest rates are still low. We talked with Mark Roffers and we are optimistic that we will have growth in Oregon and in Fitchburg. So we want to be sensitive to that. We also want to be sensitive that our students might have more needs when they come back to us in the fall, particularly in special education. And so, when we are looking forward to our kids being back in person 7/12, a lot of our students that have special needs have been in person. So we just want to make sure that our caseloads are such that we can meet our students' needs in case those have increased while we've been closed. So really in looking through all of that, we really felt that we should be more limiting in our open enrollment spaces than we have in the past. Because if we stay limited now, we can always open up more spaces in June. So we would like to get a more accurate picture of what our growth looks like and what our student needs look like before we open up more spaces for open enrollment. So if you look at table 1, that is our recommendation in column E, that we would be open for 4-year-old kindergarten and that we would be open, so we would open 10 spaces for 4-year-old kindergarten and we would leave 10 spaces open in kindergarten because we do have more families interested in coming to us in 4K and in kindergarten. And we also know that we have to be sensitive to the needs of the middle school and the fact that those classes are higher than we would like. So if we have 4-year-old kindergarten and kindergarten students, we have time to prepare for them coming to middle school. But then we really felt that we should have 0 spaces in 1st through 8th so that we could assess the needs of our resident students first. And then in high school, we do have room at our high school for open enrolled students. Similarly with special ed programming, that we really feel with where caseloads are now, that we don't have space currently for students who need special ed programming, but we're hopeful that we would have space come June once we have a better sense of what those needs might be. And then table 2 just gives you a historical picture of really how many open enrolled spaces we have allowed in the past. So we are a little bit smaller this year than we have been historically. Table 3 just gives you a sense of how many students enroll with us over the summer. As you can see, it is quite a few. So we always need to make sure that we reserve room for the move-ins and the registrations during the summer. And then table 4 just gives you a sense of the move-ins that is broken down by grade level. So with that, we are asking the board to accept the recommendation of table 1 and set those as our open enrollment spaces for the 21-22 school year. So with that, I'd like to ask Dr. Bergstrom what I missed and then open it up for questions.
I just want to mention that Andy Weiland and I met with Mark Roffers last week to talk about population projections, what needed to be adjusted, given the fact that his original projections certainly didn't account for a pandemic and all the related issues. And so he's putting together a proposal to give us some short-term and long-term updates that I think would be very useful to us this spring and may inform what the board decides to do in June related to whether or not you open up additional seats.
Thank you. Krista, any questions?
No, I think, it's a really important point that you brought out that, limiting now because we can't decrease, but we can always increase. So I think that's a really important point. So I appreciate you being realistic, but conservative. Gina, just one question in terms of open enrollments out, and it's really great for you to hear that, which we thought would happen, is that some students that moved out of their district for their children's needs, that they do plan to come back. We thought that that would likely happen, and so I'm really glad to hear that because we believe in the education we deliver in the Oregon School District. My question is, of the families that enrolled out, if they were an open enrollment that we accepted and then they chose to enroll out, do they come back in as a resident student, or do they have to reapply as open enrollment again?
If they are not a resident and they withdrew from us, then they would need to apply again.
Okay.
So that might be the place where, even though we try to be really clear with families, and Jen Hansen, our registrar, I cannot thank enough for navigating all of these conversations. So that might be an area where we come back in June and talk about those situations, and we may want to open up space, but families will need to apply again.
Okay, so if you open enrolled in and you stayed with us, you become a resident, but if you've then again withdrawn, you have to reapply to be an open again.
If you're not a resident, you have to reapply again. So if you were in second grade, right now we wouldn't have space.
Great,
But
okay.
that is something we can absolutely reassess in June.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that,
Yes.
that the status changes if you open enroll and go out. So thank you, that's all my questions.
Troy?
Yeah, a couple of things. So, noticing that our current enrollment, we're really within 1% of last year's numbers for current enrollment. I did note though that the space that we've reserved for resident growth is quite significantly higher than what we've reserved last year. And so I'm just trying to kind of think through that. Maybe try and answer that question for me first before I go on.
Yes, so it is higher because we are being more limited with open enrollment. So that's why the numbers appear higher, because normally you would, if you increase open enrollment, then that number goes down.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's the correlation. Okay. So then my next question is on the capacity calculations that we have. Is that our physical capacity, or is that tied to the OMS restriction on size? Meaning, do we have 14 or 15 sections for, say, kindergarten through 6th, or are those values actually higher?
So great question. So what we did in determining our capacity is we looked at if we didn't have Oregon Online, and that the students went back to what we call their home school. So every student has a home school, even if their teacher of Oregon Online is different. So if we said everyone's back in person in the fall, which we see no reason right now to think that wouldn't happen, then those students all went back to their home schools. How many sections would we have within our class size guidelines? And so that's really our maximum capacity, because if we go over that capacity, then we're looking at hiring staff, and that becomes a budget issue. And we talk about staffing in March. So it may not we might have more room at those schools, but we don't have teachers, and we would be over class size guidelines.
Okay, yeah, and that answers my question, because yeah, I mean, generally we have 4 at each school.
Generally, right, other than Forest Edge.
Yeah, okay. So then, I guess my next thought, and I appreciate the conversations and the work that we're going to do with Roffers to update those projections. I think that's really important going forward. And I agree. I'm comfortable with where we're at on this right now, and just knowing that we can always adjust this in June. But I'm sort of thinking, with all that we've learned with virtual learning and going forward, and looking down the road with and looking at our restriction at the middle school being really the bottleneck for all of our class sizes. I'm just curious, if we were to look a year or two into the future, if there would be an opportunity to address that capacity constraint with some additional virtual enhancement, perhaps, where we might be able to look at increasing our open enrollment numbers in the younger grades, with the thought that we might be able to accommodate those classes at the middle school with some out of the box thinking.
Yes, so we've had a lot of conversation about that. So I will let Dr. Bergstrom speak to that.
Yes, we have, because a theme from really the entire year is what are we learning from this that we can apply forward to create an even better educational experience for our students. That's been something that we have discussed at almost every meeting and will be a big topic of conversation for school leadership teams this spring. So do I anticipate more families will want to partake in online opportunities? I absolutely do.
And I guess just a suggestion or a thought, maybe that's something that we talk about with the Vision Steering Committee in the spring. You know, bringing in what we learned from the Roffers projections and, you know, looking at a long-term projection as to when we're going to hit that capacity at the middle school and tying that into a potential referendum. So that's all I had. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Troy. Tim?
Yeah, I too had questions about that with all we've learned. And I appreciate the fact that we are updating the Roffers study to see if it has just moved out or if the mix from what we're seeing is going to change more permanently. So I too am looking forward to the Roffers update along with where we go with blending in online classes where it makes sense for the long-term future. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Anna?
I guess my comments would be, I think it makes a lot of sense to err on the side of being more conservative as far as the number of open enrollment spots, not only given some unknowns on growth, but also unknowns on returning students who may be open enrolled out, and the additional, ensuring that we have the resources to provide the level of education that we need for students who are coming back after being virtual for so long. I think that's well thought out, and I appreciate all of the efforts that go into this, and I'm in support of what's being recommended. I think it's a good starting point.
Thanks, Anna. Kevin?
Yeah, a lot of good questions that have been asked already. The only real question I had is a real detailed one. Reading table 3 in the board pack. These are up-to-date numbers, I'm assuming. And if I'm going to do some live math here, it looks like we've had a net movement out of 21 students. Is that what I'm seeing here? Or is that a projection in table 3?
So yes, if you look at the September resident students compared to January resident students, yeah, we've had a decrease. Now, open enrolled are not counted in that number because they are, it's a different funding formula. So on a net basis, that wouldn't be the number, but that would be the number for resident students.
Okay, and have we lost more kids, relatively speaking, on the open enrolled side, or is it pretty much the same from a percentage base? Well, maybe not percentage because we're talking much bigger numbers, but on a relative basis.
Yeah, so I would say there have been maybe a small handful of open enrolled students, but I would have to look to Katie or Andy to know the net for open enrolled, but it's been very few. I think part of the factor is knowing they have to apply to come back, and that's a risk.
I would imagine once you get in this great district, you want to stay here, right? So that makes sense. Okay, thanks. That's all I had.
Thanks, Kevin. Heather?
Yep, thanks everybody. I had some similar questions, but they've been answered. My one question is there a timeline for a survey or some kind of commitment, maybe is too strong of a word, that we then understand who that might have left the district for this year would be coming back? Is there a deadline or how do we kind of get a sense of how many people will be coming back in so that we might be able to adjust the numbers should there be space?
So there's no deadline by law if you're a resident student, because you can really enroll at any time, right? But Jen Hansen, our registrar, does have a plan to reach out to those families so that we can get a sense of who's going to return to us.
Okay, and that would, I'm assuming, since it sounds like everybody's doing the right thing here, that it's going to be in enough time so that we could, if there is space, that we could capture those people who maybe still do want to open enroll but are disappointed right now that we aren't able to accommodate them.
Yes, that is our preferred path, is we would have the best information we could have by the June board meeting so that we could open up additional spaces if we have room.
Okay, that's all that I had on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. I don't have anything. The administration is seeking a motion to approve the number of spaces available for open enrollment as set forth in Table 1 of their January 25th document to the boards. Is there a motion to that effect?
This is Krista. I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
This is Tim. I'll move second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Raise your hand if you have anything. Okay, seeing none, Katie, could you?
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison, Mr. Maring,
Yes, yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes. Motion carries. Well, I don't know what that was, but we got an echo there for a while. That was good, Kevin. So motion carries. Thanks, Gina, for putting that together for us. All right, that takes us to, I get to my agenda. Review of participation in the high school winter athletic competitions. At our last meeting, we approved allowing winter athletics to participate outside the county, but we asked that this be placed on the calendar for review at this time and in the action area. And so, Leslie, I don't know if you're going to start off or Mike.
Actually, Mike will be presenting and I will just be the backup person and the person who moves the slides forward. So I'm going to hand it off to Mike Carr right now.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, Mike. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Have some exciting information that I want to share, and my goal is to make sure that no questions are unanswered, but you'll have time for questions at the end. So I just wanted to give some updates on a couple main, really important pieces, and Andrew touched on this earlier. We started competitions the first week of practice. So the girls basketball started that first week. And our athletes are loving what they're doing, and they are also doing a really, really good job with safety protocols. I think they know that this is a really high leverage decision, and they understand the gravity of that. And I'm really proud of them, and I'm proud of our coaches because they know that this is a pretty special opportunity that can be taken away if things aren't followed. So I do tip my hat to both our kids and our coaches because they have done an outstanding job. So what I just want to go through, and I'll go through this in some detail because I think there are things that people may not know and may not know. So I want to make sure that I go through this kind of in detail. So we put together the 5 sports that are currently competing right now. And just wanted to go through and remind people where we were at with things. Wrestling has 16 total athletes, and they played 2 varsity games. And if you remember, they could only play 2 varsity games. So they kind of maxed out their schedule. And they will start the WIA regional on Saturday. Swimming has 19 total athletes, and they did 1 virtual meet and 1 in-person meet last week. So we were able to leverage in-person meet with them. And they start their regionals on Saturday as well. And then this is where the numbers need a little bit more explanation. So we have 31 girls playing basketball. We've scheduled 10 varsity games so far. We will add some more if we can in all of these areas except for wrestling and swimming because they start their schedules, the WI tournament this weekend. And once we start the tournament, then we don't play outside of that. So the girls have had 10 varsity games, and then they've had 8 JV games, and they don't have any JV2 games listed for a reason, because the JV games are set up by 2 separate teams, and they intermix. So one week, one team might play, and one week the other team might play. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, not every school that we play even in a normal regular year, doesn't have a JV2 team. So our JV2 teams don't always play, especially in some girls sports, because there aren't enough girls to field teams in other schools. So an example would be like if we played Beaver Dam in basketball, we could play 3 boys games, but we could only play 2 girls games because that's all the teams that they offer. I hope that makes sense to everybody. So then this year, what we've done is taken both JV girls teams, kind of separated them by class, and then they've played every other game, or so the coaching staff has decided which games have played. And we added another JV game this morning. So we've got another one there. And then the boys have 67 boys are out for basketball, which is probably a record number. We have 12 varsity games right now, 9 JV games, and then 8 JV2 games. And we've been trying to add these because if you look at the number 67 divided by 3 is way too many. We actually have an additional JV2 team. So the boys actually have 4 teams. So when they travel, and we'll talk about travel in a little bit, we have 4 teams total. And then if we go to hockey, we have 32 playing hockey. We've played 7 games, varsity games, 3 JV games, and those numbers might seem light too, but if you remember, both hockey was the one sport that was able to play club sports before the season started. So they actually played 10 games before we even started that. So they'll be at 17 games, and they start the tournament next week. So if you look at the bottom, you'll see that we'll be starting postseason this week and then in the next 2 weeks after that. So these were some questions that we knew you would ask about. The first thing we would just want to remind you that the safety protocols, there are 3 big ones that we think are really important. One is that students will do a health screener, and we will talk about that in the next slide a little bit more. But they will check their symptoms every morning before 9 o'clock, hopefully. And they will log in and do that. And then we've created a spreadsheet that keeps all that data together in case we have to do contract tracing and that sort of thing. During practices and competitions, our kids are wearing masks and they're still physical distancing. We have had, it's been really hard, but I'm proud of our kids. They have to practice in a 6-foot bubble during the week, and then they play when they can play. So it's not like I told the board last time, it's not your typical sports season. So that's been a little bit different, but our kids have been rolling along really well. And then during bus rides, our kids are masked and they're physical distance, and we cap the number of kids that can ride on a bus at 25, or per team. If we have less than that, we're only going to take less than that. So the health data so far, we've held about 37 kids out due to symptoms, maybe just one practice. If they're not feeling well, we've encouraged and stressed with our kids that if they're not feeling well, they shouldn't come to school or come to practice. So they're doing a good job with that. We have quarantined 16 kids due to multiple symptoms, and Raven will talk about that in a minute. And then we've had to quarantine due to close contacts 3, and we've had 4 students test positive since we've started. So I feel like we've done a really good job as far as trying to create a safety net and put together the protocols that we have with kind of the rules that we have to follow.
I think we also want to point out, Mr. Carr, the 4 cases of students who were positive for COVID, the transmission didn't happen in athletics. So that's an important piece to point out.
Yep, that's correct. They were all community spread, either through household or somebody that they knew. So I will go through this and then I'll turn it over to Raven. So we have this health check process, and this is kind of our double safety net. We ask students every morning to log in and monitor their symptoms. And we want this, we want to do this because our goal is twofold. One is so they actually will pay attention to their bodies and pay attention to how they're feeling, and then they can self-assess themselves. The other thing is it takes a long time for for us, and Raven will go through the steps to counsel students if they have indicated symptoms, or if they're close to quarantining, or if we have to do contact tracing. So what we were finding when we first started, which was a barrier, where students were filling this form out when they were going to practice, as they were walking in the building, as they were going to a late practice at 6 o'clock. And then we weren't able to kind of snag them in a way that would be beneficial for both themselves and the teams, to make sure that we were trying to limit any exposures. So there's a 2-tiered process. They do the screener before 9 o'clock, and then they check in with their coaches again prior to practice. So the one thing that I'm really excited and happy about is our kids are taking this seriously. We've been trying to educate them. When we first started, January 7th was the first day we had 90 kids not make that 9 a.m. deadline. And then last week we had 24 kids. So this is what we've tried to do, is we've tried to educate. I think that's what we do best. We're educators. We try to give them the why and not just the compliance, because the compliance part can be tough. So we try to remind them how important it is, because we know, especially now, this is really important, because as we head into the postseason, if we start to have some cases, that's going to take teams out of, because we have a 14-day window. So if we have people who test tomorrow, like, they're going to be done for 14 days, and that might limit their opportunities in the postseason. So I'm going to turn it over to Raven right now, because what we do is Laura and I will go through, and Laura Creeps has done an awesome job. She has been a saint and a tireless worker in all of this, because this is all brand new stuff for all of us. But she has really been the one that has kind of kept the train on the tracks. So when a student would contact us and say they have 2 symptoms, then we kind of have a new engine that starts, and that is, then we turn that information over to Raven, and Raven's going to go through that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Raven Folker. I'm one of the nurses for the district. There are 3 of us. So like Mike said, if a student fills out their checklist every day and they have 2 or more symptoms of illness, Laura puts it onto a spreadsheet, and that is shared with our nurses, and then we follow up with the student and the family. So we review signs and symptoms of illness, and then it goes into our 3 options. So our options to return to sports and to school are either a 14-day quarantine, a negative COVID test to return, or they can get a alternate diagnosis, a letter from their physician with an alternate diagnosis to return to practice. So at that point, we direct them to, most people are opting to test. And so we direct them either to their physician, their primary physician, which most likely they are testing if they're showing symptoms. Otherwise, there's free testing sites, and we also have orchards at Oregon. So most of you are probably familiar with. They are testing for influenza as well as COVID-19 now. So that's been an awesome resource for us. Once a student would test positive, if they would test positive, then that's when the contact tracing begins. So then we are reconnecting with the family and going through the 48 hours prior to symptom onset, because that's like peak transmission time. So we're seeing if they were within 6 feet of anyone else for a cumulative time of 15 minutes in a 24-hour period. So that's kind of really when the work starts going. So if it isn't in person, where right now high school is not in person, some are in pods, but we contact trace for teachers, students, and then any athletes. And then we always do ask too if they're in any other activities outside of school with students that would be going to Oregon, just to cover all of our bases there. At that point, we go through isolation period, which is 14 days, families quarantine period, and educate through all of that, because there's lots of different moving pieces of how long the family has to quarantine versus how long the student has, or the positive person has to isolate. And then we go through their return date, which is that 14 days, and report to Public Health Madison, Dane County, and collaborate with our contact there and make sure we're not missing any pieces. And then we also do follow up prior to that student returns to athletics, just to make sure that they are feeling better and that no one else in the family, or if they have any other siblings that are in athletics, have tested positive in that meantime. Anything I missed, Mike? Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think the big thing, and I didn't explain it very well, but when you look at the slide that says 9 a.m. deadline that was missed, so on the 19th, we had 24 kids that missed the deadline, but that doesn't mean they didn't report. So they still reported through the screener, they just missed the 9 o'clock deadline. And then we also screened them again when they came to practice. So I don't want you to think that 14% of our kids aren't doing anything or we're not catching them in a screen. They're just not meeting that deadline. And I think the big thing that Raven just talked about is why we wanted to move that deadline earlier in the morning is, one, kids are already up for school or should be going to school. And two, because we've had situations early in this process that have taken all day to figure out. So we can't just do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because we would be pulling kids. We've had close contacts and other things like that we just, the mechanics behind that are just what we feel is the best practice to start at 9 o'clock. So I don't want to give the false sense that we're not screening kids or we're not doing our jobs. It just, there's kind of a give and take here with our student athletes to make sure. And it's continuing the education piece of doing that. So Raven, what did I miss?
Yeah, I think you covered it all.
Okay. I think we have one more slide.
We do.
Okay, so just some budget implications as we kind of have started that I wanted the board to be aware of. When we talked about this, we knew that we would have facility rentals. We knew that we would have transportation issues, but I just kind of wanted to walk you through the decision so far of where we're at. So the good news is most of our games have been played at high school, so we haven't had to rent outside facilities as much as I anticipated we would, or rent other high schools as much as we would have. So that's been a really good plus. I am forecasting that if we do the alternate fall and we do spring, that we will have more facility rentals for a couple reasons. The alternate fall season, most places have already played those games. And so most people have already played football, or most people have already played boys soccer. So there will be some facility rental issues that I anticipate, and I'll have a clearer picture of that at our next meeting. Transportation, we didn't want transportation to be a barrier in this, so we have offered transportation, and all of our games require transportation, so our transportation numbers are going to go up. We have a longer distance to travel. We need more buses, and I will give a tip of the hat to our bus drivers because they have been stretched thin. They have been stretched thin not only because of our education model, but because we are requiring and asking for more buses, and they've done a great job answering that call. So that is another kind of forecasting thing that I will have more information at our next meeting. As we go forward, we will increase with more sports and more participants. So a lot of the sports going, if we continue on this path, a lot of the sports have a lot more people. Soccer has 75 kids, football has 75 kids, track and field have a lot of kids. So when you talk about putting kids on buses and only being able to put 20 or 25 on a bus, that is going to come with a cost. And just to give you a super quick math, like when we go to Monona Grove High School for a normal boys basketball game, if we take 2 buses, sometimes we only take 1, it usually costs $280. When our boys on Wednesday go to Kettle Moraine High School, we're going to take all 4 teams. It's and the price tag for that is $1,500. So the more we travel, the more cost there's going to be. I think we're going to be somewhat budget neutral through this winter season, but as we continue, and if the Dane County orders are where they're at, then we're going to obviously incur a lot more costs. And then the other thing, the ticket revenue, we will not have, obviously, because we can't have home games, we will not have any ticket revenue for home games this year, and that budget number is about $85,000. So you take that out of that donut, and that's a pretty big hole. So I think that is it. If people have questions.
Great, thanks. I think we'll do this similar to how we've done this in the past, is give board members an opportunity to ask questions and to make comments. I'm going to start tonight, and the reason I'm doing that is one of my roles as board president, and the role of every board president, is to facilitate the board's operations and to make sure we're functioning together as a team. And I want to address an issue that has arisen from our vote last time about whether to permit co-curricular sports to travel outside of the county for competition. We had a really excellent conversation like we've had throughout the COVID stuff, which resulted in a vote pursuant to the recommendation of Dr. Bergstrom. And part of being a board member involves engaging in discussions, providing feedback that we've done to the administration, and voting on issues. And a lot of times that generates different views between board members and reactions amongst the public, and which by their very nature involves certain levels of passion. And that's expected, and that was similarly true with the sports vote. And the education of our kids is important, and it's important to all of our 2,400 families in the district. When we do that, when we engage in those activities, we do that as a board of 7. We bring differing views, different voices, different votes when we're called to vote to the table. But by the operation of law, each of us individual board members, we don't have any authority outside the scope of a properly public noticed meeting of the board. And once we vote, once that vote is taken, that decision becomes the voice of the board. And the 7 of us, by our board policy and protocol, are pledged to support that board decision, even if we disagree with it. And we're collectively held accountable to the public as a board and not as individuals. This board has been true to that framework over the last difficult year, in the years that I've been on the board. We've had difficult discussions. We've expressed differing views to each one of us and to the administration on several tough issues over the last year. And we've respected each board member through that process. And that's something I've been really proud of us as a board, is we've respected those processes. And then for the most part, the public's been respectful of the board and its members. But the recent email that we've seen and related social media posts, which focused on one of our board members and brought that board member's family into the discussion, was out of line. That type of community dialogue has not been part of this district's culture, and I hope it doesn't continue. I don't have any questions, Mike. That was a really good presentation. Heather.
Yep, thanks, Mike, for that information. I don't have any specific questions. I guess I share the same concern that I had thought about the last meeting about kids going back to school, while playing in athletics. I don't have a specific question, so maybe I'll save it for discussion. The other piece is I guess I'd like some clarity as we think about spring. Here we are in winter. Winter's almost wrapped up, but just you alluded to budget increases, and I'd like to get more information on that going forward so that as a board we can review it. But I think, for what's happening right now, your presentation gave me what I needed.
Thanks. And we will have that information for you, Heather. We haven't gotten our bills yet. So, to pull that
Right.
at the end of the month, we'll have more. And then we can
Right.
forecast a little bit better for sure. And we'll know where the gas prices are because that's also a function of that. So.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Kevin,
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the update. Good to see that obviously the kids are excited about competing, for the most part, taking their responsibility seriously in terms of their reporting, what have you, and they're learning lessons, obviously, when they're not following the guidelines. So great that we're enforcing all that. You mentioned the bus drivers too. I don't know if it's the same bus drivers driving the kids that are in person to school in the morning, but I want to give a shout out to them because I know that trips are being made all around the state to allow the kids to compete, and it's tough to wake up the next morning and have a bus full of some youngsters after driving from a long distance. So special shout out to them. It's just kind of points to how everyone in the community's had to pull together behind the decision, and we're making the best out of a short season and helping a lot of kids fulfill their dreams of playing with Oregon on the front of their jersey. So really good stuff, and hope and pray it continues. And as others have said, look forward to getting into the spring sports and the challenges that that'll bring. So we'll take one sport at a time though and start our planning there. So thanks, Mike.
Yep, you're welcome.
thanks, Kevin. Anna.
Thanks, Steve. Couple of questions, I guess. How successful have we been with matching our protocols with the teams that we're playing against? Has that been well received? How are we doing on the spectator question of 2 versus 4? I guess I'm curious to know how receptive other teams have been to following the standards that we've kind of established.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have not had to turn one game down because we've kind of leveraged with some people that, hey, if you're going to do concessions, we would prefer you don't, or if you're not going to do them in the gym, that sort of thing. So the communication between us and the other districts we've played have been great. People have really rallied because when I ask for protocols, I get them right away because they have to share them with everybody. So, and they feel really comfortable with those. And they also know that it's an opportunity that they can't be lax on either. So I'm feeling really good about our protocols and the protocol information exchange, and the fans thing has been good. We have had a couple games where there have been no fans, but we have had multiple games where we have had a chance to have fans there. So, and we know that's important for our parents because they want to cheer on their kids. We totally get that. So no, it's been good.
Great. Second question, I guess, relates to some of the follow-up. I think that was supposed to happen after a game, as far as any, kids who had symptoms or were in quarantine. I guess, how frequently has that resulted in any quarantining on our side or any impacts to our athletes?
Great question again. We haven't had any, we have had no quarantine because of games from opponents yet. So that's been good. The kids who have been in quarantine have been in our programs have been household exposures, and they've also, some of them had already been on quarantine already because of household exposure. So we're feeling really good about that as well. So I'm optimistic that we can keep it going and continue to have some success in that area.
Thank you. A couple of other questions, maybe not so much related to our athletes, but to our community members or other students. Have we seen any shift in families selecting the phased restart versus Oregon online since we've made that decision to hold competitions outside the county?
Not that I'm aware. I'm trying to think back to whether or not I have received any emails from a parent telling me so. I can't think of any right now that may have. I can certainly check with our registrar to see if anybody has shared anything in that sense, but I don't believe so.
Okay, just curious to know if you had a pulse on that at all. And I guess my last question really is focused on looking forward. obviously the motion that we took action on is specific to winter sports. What does the calendar look like for the spring sports season? And when are we going to be faced with this decision again as a board or as a district?
That's a great question. I think Mike and I can probably both add to it. But as far as the fall season that we're trying to squeeze in between winter and spring, I believe that in order to give those teams an idea of what's ahead of them, a decision about the fall and spring sports seasons would probably be brought to the next board meeting agenda. That would be February 8th.
February 8th, okay.
And I would jump in there just to kind of remind you in what kind of situation we're in. So, because we moved the fall season to kind of spring, and spring means like February 8th, to be honest, that's kind of when we're going to start our alternate fall seasons. Now that doesn't mean we're going to compete. I mean, we decided that we were going to practice, so we're going to for sure practice, and we'll have more information for you at the February 8th board meeting.
Okay. Those are all my questions at this time.
Thanks, Anna. Tim?
Mike, thanks so much for all the information and the encouraging information at that. What are we hearing from the other schools, particularly in our area? Are we hearing similar success in their districts, would you say, overall, just anecdotally?
I would say the success really depends on protocols. We have neighboring districts that might have been on a pause. We haven't been on a pause yet. But I would say, like I said at the last meeting, there hasn't been a lot of districts have been on pauses for different reasons. So it's something that we have to be really vigilant on to make sure that we keep doing what we're supposed to be doing to slow and stop and slow the spread. So there have been, cases in other districts just like ours. It just all kind of depends who it hits and where it hits and how it hits. We've been fortunate that our positive cases have been household exposures and some in a household, so that has kind of contained itself.
All right. Certainly the winter sports have been ahead of high school in-person education at this point. What are you hearing from the coaches? Are you hearing anything that you didn't expect from the coaches who are kind of out in front of this a bit? Are they equally as encouraged or excited about being out there? Or are you feeling some hesitancy? And I'm not looking for specific coaches. I'm just looking in general.
No, I would say, like I mentioned in my opener, I'm very proud of our coaching staff who have taken this really, really seriously. People have really stepped up. So I've been really happy with that because they also know that this is important, not only to, the kids, but to them to, in a leadership position. They've taken the lead as far as, kind of showing the way and being, not totally on kids, but, again, educating how important it is. So yeah, I mean, there has been some hesitation with our coaching staff for sure, because it's definitely, they're at a different level of exposure when they're, with kids and on a bus for a couple hours and that sort of stuff. So yeah, there is some hesitancies for sure. I think people have to realize that it wasn't just a slam dunk for a lot of our coaches to come back, and we had to replace some coaches in the 12th hour. So it wasn't just as easy as I think some people might have thought it would have been. I mean, we hired three coaches like 2 days before the season started. So
got it. Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that because you're right. Otherwise, not hearing that, not knowing that we had to replace some coaches at the 11th hour, you would just assume everything was smooth as can be. And we know that that is not always the case.
No, I would say that I've always been proud of my staff, but I'm incredibly proud of my staff this year because they have taken on numerous different challenges that nobody could ever think of in the past. So they have stepped up to that and they're doing a great job with that.
One last question with regards to reporting. Does any of the reporting information go outside of our school? Does the WIAA require any kind of reporting? Do we report anything to beyond the normal testing reporting when someone goes in to test? Do we have any reporting requirements to Dane County?
Mhm. Go ahead.
Well, we do when, for all of our students and for our staff, there is a reporting system for positive cases within the school district. And the students who are playing on athletic teams would go through the same reporting system through Dane County.
So just out of curiosity, if we report in and then someone, because they have a symptom, goes in to be tested at one of the free sites for instance, is that double recorded or is that somehow synced up?
It's synced up. I would call Gina, our resident expert on that, because she has to do a lot. She does all of the recording for the staff. So if you'd like to give some clarity on that, Gina, it might be helpful.
Sure. So when we have a positive case on our school grounds or as a school sponsored activity, we have to report it to a state reporting system. So I report staff and the nurses report students. And so so the state can monitor trends. And so we are usually the first to know. So we report it first. So if that positive test does come through, then public health would check to see if they're already in the reporting system. And if they are, then they just add detail to it. If they're not already in there, then we have a designated public health person assigned to us, and he's been phenomenal. So he will call either myself or the nurses to let us know that we had a positive case and just inquire as to why it may or may not have been reported. So that there isn't a double count and that he wants to make sure that it was reported to us so that nothing was missed.
Great.
I feel really confident in that process.
Excellent, thank you. I do have one other question. You mentioned that the Orchards folks are not only testing for the flu, but now they're testing for COVID. Is that available to students and staff? And is it available to anybody else?
Oh, I am stumbling because I'm trying to remember the parameters around the Orchard study. I believe it's for our students, but can anybody add to that? Raven, can you add to that?
Yeah, so Orchards was started for absentee rates for respiratory illnesses. So it is just students. However, if there's a student that's getting tested, the whole family can get tested.
Thank you, Raven.
That's it for me. Mike, thanks again for bringing the information.
You're welcome.
Troy.
Great. So, Mike, if you had to take a guess on the 67 boys, the record number of student athletes that we have in basketball this season, would you say that's like partially due to the pandemic, that there's just a pent up demand for activity, or do you think that's just more of a lot of this class wants to play basketball? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that factor into that. Number one, we had, the middle school has had larger classes the last couple of years. So we know that there are more kids coming from that middle school to the high school. Number two is because we couldn't really have an evaluation period, we kept every kid that went out for basketball. So there were no team selections, there were no team cuts. The third thing is, and to Mr. Kleiner's chagrin, the CYO basketball program didn't run this year because of the same thing. So some kids might have gone out for CYO basketball and done it in a different manner. So that opportunity wasn't there for them. So we just kind of gathered everybody and made it work. So I'm really happy with our basketball staff because they've done a really good job with that, because those numbers are big numbers for.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a good point. I hadn't thought about the CYO or the absence of that we did probably provide an outlet for some of those athletes. So that's great to hear. On the 4 positive tests that we had, so my my interpretation of that would be that those tests were not within 48 hours, those positive tests were not within 48 hours of a competition. Is that correct?
That is correct. All of our positive tests were before we started competition, or they were already in a quarantine themselves.
Okay. All
So
right.
we haven't had to go back to a school and say we've had a positive kid come out of this game in the game we played yesterday. So we've been very fortunate with those 4, that they were kind of self-contained.
Yeah. And then no positives from other teams that we've competed against either?
Nope.
Okay. Great. Great. And I had the similar question about spring sports on the timing of that. So, maybe that, maybe many of my questions can be talked about at the next meeting. But I have been starting to hear some input from the community on how things are really kind of stacking up in the spring, where we're going to have the fall sports, the spring sports, and then some club activities that are coming up. So I guess just something that we're going to have to think about as as an athletic department and as a board is the clause that we've put in our COVID addendum regarding a commitment to playing no other teams or workouts. And I'm just curious how that's going to be impacted as these things are stacked up against each other, and there's just not going to be that time, any time in between. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that yet, Mike, or if that'll be something that we'll be discussing in the future.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it more in the future, but I think we also have to think about exposures, and we have to think about pods, and we have to think about limiting. And I think that's kind of my thought is if we have to have an overarch of why we're doing what we're doing, right? And if we have to have reasons why we're not doing other things. So I think that's the big thing. But right now, we've tried to keep the athletic department as small and as potted as we can without additional exposures from other places to make it be successful. So I think if we open the door and, but that's something we can evaluate later because we'll have another month of data by then through public health, and public health may or may not change the order by the 8th. The next one expires on the 10th. So I think those are some things. And I think we also have to realize that this is an unusual year and people have choices. So I think we have to be able to give people the information they need to make an educated decision for their family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then my last point is I have heard some student athletes have had some anxiety about, they may have at-risk family members at home, and they've seen some of their teammates engage in some careless or activity that's not as strict as what they're comfortable with. And I guess I've heard about some situations where students have had to do some self-policing, and I just, we didn't have a lot of time to educate, and I know our coaches have done a tremendous job with educating, and as you've described so well earlier, Mike, in really, stating that this is a reward, but as we go forward, I think we really have to keep that education in front of everyone so that we don't put our student athletes in that uncomfortable position where they have to self-police or feel that anxiety. So, and that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Krista?
I just have two questions because I know this is kind of getting long, but piggybacking on Troy's comment, I know we went from 91 students not meeting the deadline by 9 a.m. to 21 or 24, and that's really good. I guess I'm curious, I don't want to make any assumptions. Why are the 24 missing the deadline?
That's a really good question, and I don't have a really good answer. If I ask those 24 kids, I slept in, I forgot, I was in a class. That spans across sports, it spans across grade levels, there's not a magic bullet of why they're missing. But again, we keep educating and trying to remind them why it's important that they do that. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that we are doing double protocols where other schools maybe are doing a single protocol. But I think as we look at what Raven has explained, what it takes for her to follow up on a missed health assessment, or that happens later, and that impact, or potentially what that means that student comes and is met at a door or whatever. And so I guess I would just like to see us explore and find out why kids are missing, because we've talked about that this is really a privilege to be in athletics. And if we're a month in and we're still having kids, or same kids are missing deadlines, I think it would be helpful to either we need to change the process, or we have to have conversations with certain families, because this has implications. So I guess I just want to throw that out there. Secondly is the virtual question about, should our student athletes be virtual? And maybe, Leslie, you can talk to this, but I would really have a hard time putting that restriction on our student athletes when we have other students that are doing things, activities outside of sports, that we are not making kids who have jobs go virtual, or kids that are in dance going virtual. So I guess I would like your feelings on, mandating a virtual or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, that whole idea of students going virtual 2 weeks post their last competition is something I thought about incessantly. I'd say all winter break, because I thought that it would be able, we'd be able to give people a greater peace of mind. However, if we are following our protocols, and we are following them to a T, then students coming to school, even if they were positive, if they're 6 feet of distance, they have 6 feet of distance between them, and they're wearing their mask, I feel we're still making the environment as safe as it can possibly be. And I also thought, similar to you, is that a lot of students are doing a lot of things probably with fewer protocols than what we're asking of our athletes. And so I had some hesitancy related to that too. I can certainly see why it would make some people feel better. I'm just not sure if ultimately it results in a safer school environment.
Thank you. Then my last is, we're learning a lot of things through athletics. And I think that's, sometimes people think we're spending too much time talking about athletics, but I think this is really helping us extrapolate to other things associated with 7-12 school, which is going to be starting. Because when you look at K-6, parents are really the ones that are driving the health check decision and making sure their kids are feeling well. When you get to 7-12, it's really more of the student responsibility, or we're putting it on the students, and the parents are maybe less involved in that. And so are we learning things here from athletics about kids staying home if they're sick, or what we're learning with kids filling out a health check or realizing what their symptoms are, or to Troy's point, feeling this pressure that they either have to come or they're seeing other kids doing that? So I guess I'm just asking that general question about how can we extrapolate what we're learning to 7-12 going in person.
Well, I'll allow Mike to add anything, but I would say one of the things that we're noticing is that, and we know this because we're educators, and that is you can't tell a young person to do it once or twice. There have to be continuous and constant reminders if we're expecting them to be able to take on that level of responsibility for something that is totally new. And to Mike's point, many times students aren't understanding the why behind it. And so not only is it reminding them to do it, but consistently reminding them why. That this is the way that we're able to keep sports open and keep schools open and keep all of the opportunities that students want to partake in. We do it through ensuring we are screening our health every day and not potentially exposing others to the virus. So repetition and why.
That's all for me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just jump in on that, Krista, and say that I feel that our coaches have done a great job of fostering a community of not coming when kids don't feel well. They've taken the lead on that. I have numerous instances of kids who have filled out the screener and then have felt worse and have reached out to their coaches. So I feel like there's trust being built between our coaches and our athletes. So I think it's we've turned the corner, because I think this is, desperate times call for desperate measures a little bit. And I think both our student athletes and our coaches understand the leverage and the gravity of this. So I think they're relying on each other more and communicating more in a different way than they have in the past. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you. Based on what I've heard and what I've seen and the great work you guys are doing, I will not be bringing forth a motion for a change or a rescind at this point.
All right, circling back, did any of those questions or answers generate any further questions or comments from any other board members? And if so, just raise your hand and I'll. Anna.
Yeah, just two quick ones. I guess the first would be, Mike, you mentioned that we had to bring in some alternate coaches. Is that just a temporary thing during COVID at this point and like a fill-in sort of a situation, or is that a permanent change because of the situation?
Yeah, all of our contracts are one-year contracts. So we'll explore and talk about that after. But we also had some coaches that were pinch hitting to pinch hit. So they were stepping in because we had a need and then they stepped out. So, I think we have a very loyal coaching staff that we have multiple coaches coach multiple sports. And sometimes people will jump in even if they're not, that's not their favorite or that's not their area of expertise to help our kids. So that's another area that I've been really proud of people have really stepped up, and some people had opted out and then opted back in. So it's been but that's every year, to be honest.
Sure. I guess the bottom line is I'm happy to hear that people were not forced to do something that they weren't comfortable with. That if there was someone that was saying I'm not comfortable with this, that we were able to find people who were comfortable and give some choice there. So I appreciate that that was done. And then my next question really, or comment, is kind of from the standpoint of talking about the other activities that are happening right in our community. And we've talked about with our youth sports organizations, asking them to follow, for example, our anti-hate speech policy. Can we do some education from the standpoint of athletics and what our protocols are and encourage? And I think that was part of our medical group. Maybe that's part of your update later, Leslie, but I guess I would really like to see us advocate on behalf of our school and keeping our schools open, our community safe, and asking and reaching out to those youth sports organizations to follow the protocols that we've established so that we can feel better about the participation that might be happening outside of our schools and not through our school-sponsored athletics. That's it.
Anybody else?
We can definitely do that, and that's something we've been doing with some of the partners that we have already. So,
Anybody else? Okay, this is listed as an action item, so Chris has indicated she would not be and the current board direction is to permit winter sports to participate outside of Dane County. So if there would be a change to that, we need a motion from one of the 6 who voted in favor of that. Do I hear any motion? Hearing none, that concludes our discussion on participation in high school winter athletics competition. Mike, thank you for the work you've done in getting us to this point, and then for your report tonight. It was really informative for us as the board, and I've got noted that at our next meeting, we're going to have a further conversation then about the fall and spring sports season. So thank you.
Well, and again, it's a lot of people doing a lot of work. So again, it's Laura and Raven and Becky and the tracing and that sort of stuff, and our bus drivers and our coaches. So it's a lot of people. Thank you.
Yep, and the board thanks them as well. Great. Next item on the agenda is the acceptance of the 21-24 audit proposal, and I think probably this is Andy's.
Yes.
Hi, Andy.
Good evening.
Go ahead.
So the Department of Public Instruction has kind of a protocol for soliciting proposals from auditors. And so we followed that. And what's kind of interesting about that process, the same process when you select architects, and I assume attorneys as well, is that they don't really let you look at the pricing. They want you to do an assessment based on certain qualities before you get to that. So we went through that. Both Carr, Newton, and myself went through and scored them independently. And then at the end, you add the last component of that, which is the cost issue, and then merge that in based on a preset selected weighting that you have done. So we had basically two that were very close to each other, our current vendor as well as Wimpley, and their costs were very, very similar as well. But just edged out a little bit was our current vendor, Johnson Block. So going through the proposals, the only other concern that we had a little bit with Wimpley was their number of hours were a little bit less than what Johnson Block had anticipated, which obviously they had a kind of an inside track on that, being that they've done it for the last many, many years. So at this point in time, we are recommending to continue with Johnson Block. The going out for proposals did save us some money because we did not get an increase in rates this year. They held us basically at the same amount of money that we are paying for the 2019, 2020 audit. They're suggesting for 2021. What questions do you have for me?
Tim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, how long have we been using Johnson Block?
We actually went back and found, and I can't believe this because time just flies, but we used them for about a decade so far.
Okay. And certainly, I always appreciate a second set of eyes, and that's the reason I asked that question. I know they've done a really great job for us. I know that we've had very little come up, very typical things come up in our audits. And so I just want to be, I just want to make sure that we're offering up, a second set of eyes that haven't been there, to get some perspectives we haven't had in the past. Again, well-respected firm. I'm familiar with them, and I know they've done a great job for us. I just want to note that a second set of eyes, even if it's just for a year or two, is sometimes very helpful. So no real questions, just wanted to make a note of that.
Yeah, Tim, we struggled a little bit with that concern. We thought about that as well. And I will probably reach out to Wimpley and hope that they solicit or put a proposal in again if you approve our current recommendation. Just because I agree with that concept that every once in a while you want to have a different set of eyes. I will share that the thing that probably, not only because the way the scoring happened, even though it was close, Johnson Block did come on top. The other thing that we're a little worried about is just the stress that's going on right now with the pandemic. Going through that change process with staff was something that we were a little hesitant about.
Troy, sorry. Tim, anything else? Are you good? Okay. Troy?
No, nothing from me. I mean, I support staying with Johnson and Block, and I'm glad to see that we went through our due diligence to request proposals, and it sounds like you went through a thorough review. So I'm comfortable staying with our current auditors.
Thanks. Anna, any questions?
No questions from me. Thank you.
Okay. Krista?
Nothing from me.
Kevin?
I'm good.
Heather? Heather, you unmute. Nothing for you? No, can't hear you, but look. Got it. We're good. And I don't have anything. So the motion is, or the recommendation is to approve continuing with Johnson Block as our auditors for a 3-year contract pursuant to the RFP. Is there a motion to that effect?
I'll make that motion. This is Troy.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Okay.
Heather, we think you need to go on mute. Causing
Yeah, there we go. I think we're getting the feedback loop off of Heather. All right, Katie, could you call the vote?
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison, Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes. Heather, we missed you on your vote. Can you turn your the camera on? Give us the down. Okay, there we go. Great. All right. Motion approved for Johnson Block for 3 years. All right. Discussion items, committee reports, anything from policy, Anna?
Just one announcement. We just sent out a doodle poll today and got feedback from everyone. We will be scheduling our next meeting for February 2nd at 5:30 p.m. So I've got a couple of agenda items there and nothing else to report.
Great. Troy, visioning.
Nothing to report. The team's been laser focused on getting kids in the buildings, so nothing at this time.
All right. Now that takes us to informational items. Worth Woods update. And I'll run that. Leslie, can you share that, the graphic with folks?
I can, just one moment.
Yeah. So earlier in the year, the board approved a conservancy ad hoc committee, and I appointed Tim as the chair with Heather and Kevin as members to that. And so Tim and I met with Leslie and Andy to talk about coordinating the operations and to move forward now with the administration. And so this was what came out of that meeting as a proposed step forward. And the first part we wanted to talk about was to populate the subcommittees. There were 3 of them. One is an environmental center, the building we purchased. We'll need to have some work done and remodeled and then to bring that into use. And then Worth Woods will need a plan pursuant to our offer to purchase, or not a purchase, but our contract for purchase. We have to develop a plan as a district for that forest. And then we'll need a fundraising committee because we had indicated that operational funds, we prefer not to use that for these projects. So Leslie and Andy worked together to determine staff members who would help with the subcommittees. And so for the environmental center, that subcommittee would be composed of Andy, Zane Heights, and Tim. And that does not mean that other people can't come in to help and work on that, but the subcommittee would be those folks with assistance from others. And then the Worth Woods subcommittee would be Andy, Craig Fisher, who is on our staff at the middle school, Megan Konopacki, who is a part-time staff member and also is a Worth from Worth Woods and was part of the sale and who's been working out there. And then Kevin Maring has agreed to serve on that committee as well. And then fundraising, for the time being, Andy and I will populate that. I don't think we'll be active quite yet because once we've delineated who would be on the subcommittees, then it was determined that the following steps would take place. One would be the meeting of the Worth Woods and environmental subcommittees, and that their charge would be to develop a plan. So for example, at the environmental center, we'll need to address some immediate infrastructure needs there and to begin developing a plan for how that building will be designed for instructional purposes, and then create a budget for the items that have been identified as being part of that plan, and then to prioritize those both in terms of projects and dollars. And then similarly, the Worth Woods Subcommittee would be meeting to begin process of developing a plan for that forest and items that need to be accomplished in there. Yeah, I mean, for example, we have the old, the mink buildings are in there, those need to be taken down. So for example, that would be one item. We would develop a cost for that and then, prioritize that with the rest of the projects out there. And then those two subcommittees would report that prioritization and cost to the Conservancy Committee of Tim, Heather, and Kevin, which would then develop an overall district plan with the administration in terms of how to proceed forward. And then, once we start getting a sense of the dollars, then we can start working on a fundraising plan for that. Well, that seemed to tie together. That was how we thought we would move forward. We're hoping that we could have done this earlier in the year, but our attention needed to be directed to moving forward with the COVID-19 things. We're in a place now where we can start doing this work as we move forward in the year. And obviously, if there are, the phase restart stuff needs to be done, that's going to take priority. But when we have time, we anticipate moving on these projects. So, Tim, did I miss anything from our conversation?
No, that captured it, Steve. Thank you for going
Okay.
through that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and then, I think you work with these subcommittees to get them started and then reporting back to the ad hoc committee.
Yes. And again, we will have people join each one of these subcommittees at an appropriate time to work on specific issues. So these won't be the only people involved in this project by far.
Yep, this will be the core. Anybody have any questions about the move forward on our conservancy oversight?
Steve, just a couple of things. First of all, I guess just take this opportunity to again thank the Worth and Conopacky families for their very generous transfer of this land to the district. Really appreciate that, their generosity in a way that's really going to help us with our environmental education initiatives in this district. So that's number one. And then just number two, I guess, I'm a little bit anxious to get started, especially on the invasive species control. I know when I toured the property, there's some threats to the quality of this forest, and the sooner we can get started in that aspect, the better. It's just like our students, early intervention is a good thing to do. So if that aspect of the project could get initiated early, I think that would be great. So that's all.
And that's what we're anticipating, Troy. We've been in contact. I know Leslie's talked with Megan about that because she obviously is out there and has a good grasp of, some of the forestry stuff out there. And if there's stuff that we can do that doesn't have budget impact, that's consistent with an over idea, I think we're going to get in there and do that. So
Right.
I would anticipate that.
I think there would be low cost things that we could do through volunteers.
Yep. And that would be, the subcommittee meeting and identifying that stuff. Some of that stuff might be just immediate get-go sort of stuff that really doesn't need to be part of a comprehensive budgetary plan.
Steve, may I mention one more piece to the plan?
Yep.
It'll come forward to the board, but designating Worth Woods as a school forest. If the board votes to officially designate that area of land as a school forest, there are benefits to us through the DNR because it would then have that official designation. And helping us with the forest management plan is one of those pieces.
Leslie, do you anticipate that proclamation or application or designation, whatever it would be something that we could have on our February 8th meeting?
Yes, we could.
Okay. Any other board members have any questions? Just Krista.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear Tim say that you're going to involve more community members. I think we have a proud tradition of having parent reps on big task force and projects like this. So I would really like to see that formalized and move forward, that we make it a point to have parent reps that are not staff or have official roles with the school district. Thanks.
Duly noted. Yes, thank you, Chris. And so we definitely want to be able to reach out to those resources and involve not just our students, but our parents as well.
Right. And the goal of this format was just this would be the teams that would coordinate those efforts when we've got that. And so we do anticipate significant volunteer and community work, both in Worth Woods and in the environmental center. I know we have already talked about having, sort of in-kind donations or folks who help when we work on that building. So.
Yeah, just thinking the communication of it, or when we show things, because sometimes people just see these slides.
Yep.
And they make assumptions. So I think if we can just add something on here, or anything that we talk about, we put that there's a role for the community, or community will be asked to be invited. That's just important. So if people just see this at a glance.
Perfect. Thank you, Krista.
Yep.
The other thing that I want to mention is, I'm sure it goes without saying, but I want to say it anyway, that there's a whole curriculum effort that will take place around using that property. And we'll depend on Dr. Bergstrom and the administration to help us understand the best way to use it, because it will affect how we develop that environmental center, how we care for the woods, et cetera. So there's a whole curriculum piece that will fold into this in the very near future.
It's just an amazing property next to the building. I saw a video from one of the teachers at Forest Edge from the other day where there was six deer wandered out of the woods and were just kind of grazing outside the teacher's window. So can you imagine, now we have kids back in that school, how cool that will be coming out of there. Okay. Seeing nothing else on that, we're going to proceed. And Tim, I would, put this under your charge then in terms of the overall committee chair to kick off and make sure the environmental Southern Worth Woods stuff get going and work with Leslie and coordinating that.
Very good. That's what I will do.
Okay, thanks. All right, that takes us to information items 2, 3, 4, and 5. Leslie, I assume you're going to go through this in one lump like we've done before, right?
I will. Thank you.
Okay, and so then we'll board members will work on this, and when Leslie's through, then go through each person for questions and comments when Leslie's concluded with these items. Thanks, Leslie. Go ahead.
You bet. I just wanted to make one point after hearing the conversation related to Worth Woods, and certainly with the athletics, is the importance of how there are so many people who have a piece to making all of this happen in a positive way for our kids. And one of the things that it just really hit me when I was fortunate enough to be able to talk to the crossing guards during Crossing Guard Recognition Week, and just how important they are to the kids. They know the kids who cross by name. They have rituals with the kids. They know the dogs that pass. And then I think about our bus drivers. And right now we're asking them to go back and forth 4 times a day with our current schedule. And they are doing it. And they are doing it because of the commitment that they feel to our kids and to our district. And then food service. They were hired as food service, but some of them are doing that. And a lot of them are riding on buses and cleaning and supervising kids. I mean, everybody's taken a small piece, and all of those small pieces, when you put it together, makes something really special happen for our kids. And it just, all the different people that were being thanked tonight, I just wanted to be able to say, when everyone comes together like that, you create really amazing things for our students. And I do feel that what we've been able to do in the midst of a pandemic is pretty amazing. So we'll talk about some of those things today. What's our status? How do we make decisions? Health and safety protocols, the educational model, why we're using it, and of course the importance of mental health, and then action steps in relation to all of those things. So we go back to a graphic that's become very familiar, and you can see with a little yellow spot here that we are in an important part of this, January 25th. It was last week, Tuesday, that our students in grades 3 through 6 started school for the first time this year in person. And it was a pretty wonderful day. And it was really meant a lot to everybody to see our students back in the schools. And then on February 8th, just 2 weeks from now, we'll be bringing in our students in grades 7 through 12. And then you'll notice that there's a chevron because there's a next step, right? We're always thinking about what might be next, how do we plan ahead, and how do we maintain a high quality education in all of these formats, including, as you notice, Oregon Online, because they are continuing with the consistent approach that they've experienced from the beginning. So, as I mentioned, our K-6 students are now in. You see some really great pictures. I noticed that the picture up on top is definitely an RCI room, and then students getting on and off the bus, and then that adorable young one in her pink mask enjoying school. And then February 8th is when we get to bring in the next group of kids, and honestly, we will be just as excited to see them too. So we know that bringing our kids in, that's a pretty big transition, right? So we had our phased restart students, who many of them were transitioning to in-person. And for our Oregon Online students, some of them were transferring to a different teacher, or they had new students coming into their class. Everybody experienced something a little bit different. It was rare that nobody had a change. So we did a lot to help prepare our students for those changes. I'm going to show you over on the side, it says example video lessons. These are the type of lessons that have been happening at all of the schools who are experiencing changes, whether they're bringing in 3 and 4, or they're bringing in 3, 4, 5, 6, or 5, 6. They are preparing our students, and it's not a one-time thing, it's preparation over time. So RCI, as an example, they have created videos. They have created videos for building tours, for mask wearing, for what social distancing and hand washing look like, how to ride the bus, how and where to enter the building. They even had a video for what should be in your backpack on the first day. So they have been really thoroughly preparing students to return. And grades 7 through 12, they're doing the exact same thing. They are also creating videos and lessons. Students are actually a part of that too, which I think is really important. But in addition, they're scheduling building tours for our students who are new to the middle school, or freshmen, or students new to the high school. And that'll take place next Wednesday. And it's a great thing because Wednesday is when we have more transportation availability. And consequently, students are signing up online. And then we are creating bus routes to be able to bring them in groups for socially distant tours. And I know there's an opportunity for middle school families to also tour the building in the evening with their parent if they weren't able to do so in the daytime. So that was transition, was really important. We talked about it a lot at the medical working group. We've spoken about it quite a bit at the board level, and certainly in all of our meetings as teams in the schools. But another thing that was really important to our opening was ensuring we had the staffing necessary to make it possible. So on the orange side of the screen, you see the action steps that were taken. And guess what? They worked. Things went really well. We were able to hire enough designated building subs for each of the buildings. I think at the last check, RCI still needed 1 more. We're continuing to monitor that. And the next most important step is recruiting people to just be a part of our regular sub pool, as opposed to being the designated building subs that are there every morning. But thank you everyone for your suggestions, because they helped, and Gina implemented a plan that yielded great results. Next, we want to talk about what our key decision-making criteria are. Because if you see where that little arrow is, that's sort of where we are right now, or where we will be on February 8th, when all of our students are in school in a hybrid model. So what are the criteria that we would be considering to make a decision to move back online temporarily? And what criteria would we look at in order to move into potentially a next phase? So for moving temporarily back online, it would be a few things that we would be considering. And the first is any change in health guidance. Certainly, we're continuing to monitor numbers in our county and in our area, our immediate area, as our staff at Public Health. Not having enough staff to safely supervise the building is another important component to the process, and that we wouldn't expect to be student or staff members absent due to transmission in the building. That would be probably evidence of transmission happening in the community if we didn't have enough staff available to safely run our buildings. And then finally, we would take a temporary pause on in-person learning if we were seeing transmission within the building, as we would want to be able to re-examine our safety efforts. If that happened, why did it happen, and what do we need to change? Now, what we'll be thinking about for the spring is, once again, we'll be looking at what health guidance might be changing. And a key piece, of course, and the reason that we are selecting a hybrid model right now is the necessity of 6 feet of social distancing, as it minimizes the number of quarantines that our students are going through. And I think that's really important, because we've spoken all along the importance of consistency. And so being able to keep our kids in school by eliminating unnecessary quarantines, or sometimes, of course, necessary quarantines, is important. We also have to consider the impact of the vaccine. We don't know how much time the rollout will take, whether it's to staff or it's to community. And we also know that our students won't be receiving a vaccine anytime this year. And then finally, we're always monitoring the effectiveness of the educational model. At each school, there are teams that meet on a regular basis, teachers, student services staff, administration, to examine the progress of individual students, and to look not only at the progress of the individual, but what the big picture tells us regarding the effectiveness of the educational model. So those are factors for decision-making, whether it is to move temporarily to online or to move to the next step in our process. And as we're making those decisions, as I said, health and safety is a key factor. So we're continuing to monitor what's happening in our community. And this is an example. We've used this graphic. It changes weekly based on the number of municipalities that have higher than average COVID positive cases. And as you can see on this particular screen, none of our community or municipalities are in there. The next piece is our dashboard, and we update the dashboard midday every Friday, and you can see there are a couple of changes to it. The first change is that we added lines to indicate if the positive cases at school were potentially coming from co-curriculars. These are either positive cases or students or staff in quarantine, so that we are able to really demonstrate the fact that there's a difference right now in particular, and that we wanted to monitor what that difference was. And then also you'll see the little asterisk when the number is between a 1 and 5. Because as we started to consider participation in co-curriculars, sometimes the numbers were small enough where we felt that we didn't want to have anything be potentially identifiable. Consequently, if there were less than 5 cases, we are now using the asterisk. For our health and safety protocols, as I've mentioned over and over, it's extraordinarily important that our students and our staff are wearing masks consistently, and they are a minimum of 2-ply masks, and that we are 6 feet apart when we are in our buildings and when we are practicing, because that is how we are able to, those 2 things are the really important pieces to ensuring our schools stay safe, along with the next thing, staying home if you are ill. Our nurse, Raven Folker, spoke about it this evening, And it's a really critical piece to ensuring we can stay in school. And that is to make sure that if you aren't feeling well, you stay at home, and that the instruction is accessible to you at home, and that there is no penalty for staying at home if you have one of the symptoms on the checklist. And so we'll be rolling out something called the Panther Pledge, and I'll show that to you in just a minute to help us all stay on the same page, remind us what's important, and we all have to be in this together and promise that we will monitor our health and we will stay home if we are exhibiting symptoms. And then, of course, the vaccine update. We do have the vast majority of our staff in who qualify for Tier 1A have had their first vaccination. And then the majority of our staff are in Tier 1B. And that includes our bus drivers, and we're very grateful for that. And the timing, we are not very patiently awaiting the phone call that tells us we may schedule our first round of vaccines. It'll be 2 rounds, as everyone knows, and we'll probably need to make some adjustments to synchronous and asynchronous instruction in order to ensure our staff can get through a vaccine clinic in a very timely manner. So, as I mentioned, what we do to work together to stay in school, one of the biggest pieces is taking the Panther Pledge, and I'll talk to you, or I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. And it's something that we will definitely talk about at the schools. We're staying home if we have a fever or any of the symptoms. And once we're at school, we are wearing a mask, we are keeping our distance, we are washing our hands, we're not sharing supplies, all of the things that we know make a difference, a big difference in keeping our schools safe. So what can families do? We have been sending out our symptoms checklist for a very long time, and we've added a few tweaks to it, and we are calling it the Panther Pledge. And we want to be able to send it home so that you have it and you can use it, and you can put it on your refrigerator or anywhere else that it becomes very accessible to the family, so that everyone in the family knows that going through these symptoms and through part 1, part 2, part 3 every day is an important part of how we're working together to keep our kids in school. So as part of keeping our kids in school, I wanted to talk a little bit about what school looks like. So as everybody knows, we have 2 models, Oregon Phased Restart and Oregon Online. And we know that our families have chosen for semester 2, Phased Restart about 74%, and Oregon Online about 26%. And that we know that it was important to take a look at who was selecting what. And we're excited to say we have some interviews planned for next week, where we're having one-on-one conversations with families across the district to better understand what led them to make the choice that they made. Because if there are things that we can learn that can help us to improve as a district overall, we want to know. We want to hear from people. It's important. And we want an opportunity to have conversations. So as far as our educational model, it is always our goal to have the highest quality instruction for all of our students, whether they're in the Phased Restart or the Oregon Online, highest quality for everyone. So what is our approach? No matter whether you're in Phased Restart or in Oregon Online, you are taught by Oregon teachers. And we believe that's important because we believe in the power of relationships. And we believe in our teachers' abilities to create really excellent learning opportunities for our students. And when they're creating those opportunities, lessons have to be designed for the mode. A lesson, even if you're helping students master the same standard, what an online lesson looks like or an in-person lesson looks like is different. And so we have learned a lot about those differences and how to enhance both of those. And it's been a lot for our teachers, a lot. But I think we're all extraordinarily proud of what we've been able to give our kids. because what we've been able to do for our students is we've been able to be responsive. We've been able to meet the individual needs of our students. Not every student every time, we will get there, but we are doing a really good job with that, with a lot of our small group meetings, our individual meetings. And we wanted to have our next phase be a model that preserved that because of how important it is. So K through 6, we have dedicated phased restart students and dedicated Oregon Online students, or excuse me, teachers, not students. And the reason we're able to do that for K through 6 is because the teachers of those grades have general licenses, so they can teach all subjects. So you were able to have an Oregon teacher and you were able to get the responsive attention you need because we're able to do really good things with class sizes too. Grades 7 through 12, the responsiveness really required that our desire for responsiveness and our desire to have all students taught by Oregon School District teachers led us to be very creative and thoughtful related to the type of model that we were using. And while we certainly are utilizing live stream and learning what we can do with that model and what's possible, we really felt that first we wanted to go to a place where we felt we could be the most responsive to our students. And that is when they are in person with us, having them in small groups where you can have small group discussions, individual conferences. You can work on things that were challenging for them in the online format. You can do all kinds of teaching that is personalized to the individual by having such a small group in your class at one time. So we have a lot of thought has been put into how to do our flipped model well. And what is flipped is students get a part of the lesson when they are online in an asynchronous format, and then they get another part of the lesson when they're in person. So instead of hearing the teacher talk while you're sitting there in person, they can listen to the teacher in a recorded format. And when they're actually with the teacher, that's when they get to do the talking and the discussing and the synthesizing and the analyzing and all of the things that make learning rich. So we're excited about our next step. And we believe that we'll be able to do good things for students. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll be thinking about what's next. And we know that the foundation for students being able to be academically successful is a really solid mental health support plan. And I would have to say that our medical working group has been outstanding in helping us with this and providing input that makes our plan even more solid. And we will certainly continue to revisit this topic with that group. But as far as supports moving forward, we are doing continuous follow-up on screeners. Our transition activities are an important part of the mental health plan, as are orientation and tours, additional in-person supports, and ensuring that we are having continuous synchronous interaction with our students. So for our medical working group, I'm very grateful to this amazing group of professionals. They've had something insightful to offer every time we've had the opportunity to speak. And so our last meeting was really about what we can do to help inspire the community to help stay in school. And the Panther Pledge is really coming from an idea shared by one of the medical group members related to what's happening on the UW campus. Our next meeting is next Monday at 6 p.m. Now, we'll round up with the equity update. And this is some really good, really exciting stuff we're very proud of within our district. And there are things that we're focusing on this year, but this is work that doesn't end, right? I remember when I first had the opportunity to serve as Director of Learning and Student Achievement, and one of the first times I was able to talk to a broader staff, I told them I will be back next year and I will be talking about the same things, because there are some things that are critical all the time, and they will remain critical all the time. And equity is one of those pieces. And you can see how it's pulled out from our graphic, because that's what I want to emphasize here is what we're doing this year. to move our equity initiative forward. And of course, you know about the fact that we're educating our students, our staff, and our families and community about our anti-hate speech policy. We're working, empowering our student organizations to be active participants. They are doing really amazing work alongside teachers to ensure that we are putting the lessons out there that are important for all of our kids. We're advancing our curriculum to promote equity, honor cultural diversity, and eliminate biases. We're engaging our parents, family, and community in forums, and we're recruiting and retaining. That should sound familiar to people because it was a part of our education compensation plan. Recruit and retain caring and professional BIPOC educators and staff. That stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And we have made headway. As a matter of fact, we've had a significant amount of work has been put into ensuring that we are diversifying our staff. And we'll be able to present to you actually an entire presentation on the work that's been done by Gina and the HR department to make this happen. We'd like to do that just a little bit before hiring season so that we can go in depth and you can understand what we have been doing and the results that we've been getting. And we still have a long way to go. I'm not going to candy coat that in any way, shape, or form, but we've made good results and we're proud of it and we're going to keep getting better. And then we've been partnering with lots of local and national organizations. And finally, thanks to our community, we have invested in professional development programs for our staff that focus on equity and racism so that we are growing together as a staff in our capacity to be able to identify when we have biases creeping into our processes and when we have examples of institutional racism and when we have racism happening right in front of us that we need to put a stop to the moment we see it. That's it.
Great, thanks. Heather, anything, questions or comments for feedback for Leslie?
Can you hear me now? Yes, oh, good, okay. Well, rebooting helps. I don't really have any questions. I just wanted to say thank you again, Leslie and team, for all of your hard work. It just continues to amaze me, the amount of time and effort and passion that you guys put into this. And just, it's so exciting to see grades 3 through 6 come back, and 2 weeks will fly by, and then we'll be with 7 and 12. And I'm also really grateful to the medical working group. Obviously that takes additional time from the admin team and the people who are on that as well from the school district side. But I just think it's such a great example of, you know, how wonderful our community can be and how we have such, you know, talented and professional people who are willing to take the time to give back to the school district. And then I'm really happy to see some additional specific points on the equity update. So all in all, just really wonderful, and thank you.
Kevin?
Yeah, so certainly want to reiterate what Heather said in terms of thanking everyone for all this work and a very thorough presentation. Leslie, would you mind backing up to the slide that just shows the active cases and reports of
You bet.
COVID? I just have a curiosity question, if you won't mind going back.
You got it. I'm sorry, just takes a second to find it. Here we go.
And not a slides, no problem. Not looking for an exact number, but just a general idea in terms of students in quarantine at school. Obviously, the biggest number, 380 in terms of cumulative. We have
Right.
30 that are active. I mean, obviously, that includes people that have, of course, positive tests or symptoms, but a lot of close contacts. I mean, do you have a general feel for, I mean, is the majority of this close contacts? You know, I'm just curious about the number itself because it's not broken out to that detail.
Well, it also includes students who report symptoms
Okay.
that lead them to be out of school. So
Okay, we
if
don't
the
know if
student
that's
has
COVID or
enough-
not.
Right.
Okay.
So it really, it's a reflection of how many students have missed school due to either having it, being exposed to it, or showing symptoms of it.
Okay, interesting. All right, that's really the only clarification I was looking for. Thanks, Leslie.
Anna?
Thanks, Steve. Really happy to hear, Leslie, about the follow-up with some of our families as to why they would have chosen the online versus phased restart in some of those different categories. I think that's going to be really helpful information for us to see how we can do better and better serve our students from that perspective. I think that's really great to hear. So thank you for taking that time and putting forth that effort. I know that it's not, it does take time, and I think it just shows that we really care and we're invested in that, and I really appreciate it. It leads me to one of my questions as far as, you know, moving forward with the phased restart, assuming things go well and we are moving in a direction of being able to bring more kids back in. I'd be interested in knowing if that could be prioritized in a way that could focus on the students who might need more of that in-person attention, whether it's for mental health purposes or for special education purposes or underrepresented folks within our community. We've heard that that's taking a big toll, and I'd like to see us be able to prioritize bringing that subset of kids back in the school or have more of that FaceTime learning sooner than maybe others. And so I don't want to tell you how to do it, but I really would love to see that be prioritized for those next steps as we look in the future of bringing even more kids back into the schools.
Thanks for mentioning that, Anna. And I just want to point out that our learning hubs, that was actually our intention with the learning hubs, right? To bring in the students who were most vulnerable first. So we actually had that approach, but I appreciate you saying, as we think in our next phase, continuing with that approach.
Yeah. And then also really great to hear about, I'm really curious to know the steps we've done in diversifying our staff and the success of that, because that is also very important. We want our staff to look like our students. And I think that is going to be awesome to see that diversity improve and see a little bit better representation within our schools from a staff perspective. So that's really exciting. And I look forward to hearing more about that at a later date. And all in all, this has been really, really wonderful information. Thank you so much for all that you are doing, all that our teachers and educators are doing. It just makes me really proud to be on this board as part of this group. So thank you so much. And that's it.
Kim.
Thanks, Steve. I too want to recognize the staff for everything they've done. I also want to recognize that, you know, it hasn't come without a lot of angst from parents and kids, and from teachers, from staff at school. You know, in true form, that angst from the staff has been not super apparent to the community. And it's always been that way. You know, I know our staff goes through the same thing, same types of things all of our families go through, but somehow they quietly do it every day, and sometimes see some real challenging situations and persist. And so I just really want to recognize the staff more than anything, because as we're getting back to school here, we've heard it in the community. It might be out on Facebook. It might be from parents. But the staff continues to just persist through it. And I really appreciate that. Secondly, it is great to hear that we've got building subs nailed down. And I don't want to overemphasize that. When I say building subs nailed down, I mean dedicated subs at each of the buildings, that we have one position left to fill, but that we've really come a long way in the last 2 or 3 weeks in hiring folks to make sure that staffing isn't the issue that keeps kids from being back in school. And so I really appreciate that. Whatever efforts Gina and the team has gone through to shore up those numbers, because we knew they were dwindling dangerously close to being the issue as to why we couldn't get kids back to school. So I really appreciate that as well. One of the slides, and I'm trying to remember the slide that talked about dedicated students. In other words, they've made their choices, and dedicated teachers. Does that tell me that we have teachers dedicated to the in-class, the in-person kids, and another group of teachers or a second group of teachers who have chosen to focus on the virtual or Oregon Online?
Yes, for grades K through 6.
For grades K through 6, yes.
Yeah. And a little bit for the high school. I think the high school has a couple of teachers who are working on serving the needs of online students, but primarily K through 6.
Yeah, well, that is great because again, to do both of those things, it takes more than a school day, a lot more than a school day to accomplish. So that's great. And lastly, the mental health support. You know, we've heard it within the medical working group, how important that mental health piece is. And we get the updates from both the staff from school, but also from the community and from folks who are practicing outside of the community who continue to tell us how important that mental health piece is. And so I know it's a daily thing. And to be able to staff that with all the kids that we have, with the small number of mental health people focusing on all those kids, I know that can be very difficult. And partnering with the community and outside services has been a real help for us. So I don't really have any questions. I just want to make sure that you and the administration and the staff know how much I appreciate what has brought us to this point.
Thank you. And I want to make sure I represent our teachers well, because while we do have designated phased restart in Oregon Online K-6, our phased restart teachers are also teaching online components. So everybody's doing both. And I just want to make sure that sadly, we haven't made anything easier, but we do have a really, I don't know, a staff that I just can't say enough about. And that includes our administrators. A lot of times, because I forget to include them, and how much the success of our students is due to everything they're doing. I just have to give them a little props too, because they're an exceptional team of leaders. Very proud to be a part of their group.
Troy. Thanks, Jim.
Great. So on the learning labs, so I know when my kids signed up for coming back to in person, they had the option to sign up for the learning labs in the afternoons. And my interpretation of that is that's really kind of wide open to any student who feels that they need that additional support in the afternoons. So my question is there a capacity limit to that, or are we comfortable with any number of students coming in for learning labs?
Thank you. That's a great point. In the beginning, when there weren't students in school, then I would say it was an invitation. The learning labs were invitation only. Now there is an element of self-selection, and there definitely is a capacity limit to it. So I'm wondering if Jim wants to talk about what he sees with that. They've been setting up study areas around the building to be able to accommodate. But
yep, at this point we are looking to gauge interest to determine the level of logistics that would need to go into place. We don't have an early indication that we're going to be inundated with massive requests. But if that comes, we do have some resources at our disposal that we will deploy, and we will spread people through the building. And we've got, generalized plans in place. We just have to see the density of need and request.
So follow up on that. Would a student in cohort A be able to go to a learning lab on a B day, or would we not permit that because then we're mixing the group?
I guess theoretically it is not unreasonable or impossible. We don't see a lot of interacting of kids in those lab settings. And if there isn't great density, I don't see why we couldn't invite a kid in.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're up there, Jim, and maybe Dr. Anderson might weigh into this in the next question too. I'm just kind of looking ahead, and it's early. I know it's early. It's not February 8th yet, but looking what the next steps might be for students who would want to or need, I should say, more in person. Maybe in the general range of the fourth quarter or something like that. Are there ideas or one or two things that you've thought about as to increasing that contact time? And I guess I'll caveat that by saying, I know we've talked about lunch being somewhat of a constraint before, and that it presents some additional challenges. And I've heard from a lot of parents actually that just simply aren't comfortable with their kids eating lunch at school. But are there one or two things that you've thought about that might be the next steps as we look?
Yeah, we've got some models drawn up for what next steps might look like, and one of the things within the hybrid would be extending the length of our school day, right? That does present a few model challenges, and we would simply have to resort to more concurrent live stream as a result of extending our day wire to wire. I could go into greater detail, and I think we've addressed that to some extent in previous presentations, but we've got schedules drawn up, and the logistics around lunches and spreading people through the building are not small ones, but we've got some plans in place as to what that could look like.
I know Jim mentioned thinking about the hubs in the afternoon of high school being drop-in. Given the ages of our students, I think we're really looking at more at targeting, kind of what was a question that came up earlier, and being strategic. When we invited students into the hub this first semester, a lot of times the families weren't even thinking that might even be something. Sometimes they had to talk their kids into coming. And so we're trying to, I think, be a little bit more still invitation based in working with families on trying to help them problem solve supports. And so I think that's a way that we're going to look to try to tap into the afternoon times for kids who might need more time at school or supports. But right now our focus has really been thinking about how to have a super solid transition to the next model, and to do that really well. And just like the first model that we've been using up until this point, our staff has done just an amazing job wrapping their heads around a completely new way to teach and learn. And every time I go into a virtual classroom, I'm just blown away with the different strategies that they're trying. Today we had a collaborative classroom visit where they were observing each other and having dialogue about instruction. And so our energy right now is, when we face restart, really focusing on having the best instructional experiences for our kids as we transition in. So that's really where our focus has been on, is having a really great next iteration of learning.
Yeah, great. And I think that lunch challenge becomes easier when it's a smaller group of kids. And if we're focusing on a smaller group of kids that come in the afternoon, we can tackle the lunch challenges better. So great, thank you both. Moving on then to the medical working group, I just wanted to point out, I watched that last meeting, and it was interesting to see the Panther Pledge topic come up, and then to see that realized just a few days later. And I really like that Panther Pledge. I've looked at it. It's a very simple process to follow, and I think it's going to be very easy for our community to understand what the different symptoms mean and how to move from step 1 to step 2. So I think that's a tremendous effort. And again, thanks to the medical working group for inventing that. And then the equity update, great to see that. I'm looking forward to the future presentation on that. I guess I just wanted to recognize the progress that we've made specifically with the administrative team and our BIPOC community and our admin team over the past few years. And we always hire the best candidates, but just recognizing that we have certainly made a I think impactful progress in that realm, and that shows all of our staff that there are many opportunities here in this district. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Krista?
Just to kind of piggyback on what Troy said, you wish that everybody in the community could take the 3 hours that we sit here for a board meeting and really hear all this information, because it's just astounding. The thing that Leslie, you and your team are doing, and all of this that we've been presented with last night is just quite amazing. And kind of on that realm, I want to give a shout out to our student services team. Talk about a group of people, from our school counselors to our psychs to our nurses. Holy moly, just the work that they've done this year. And now it begins again with a new phase in terms of kids transitioning in. So I just wondered if you could kind of chat a little bit about, both from an equity lens and a mental health lens, and maybe Jim and Shannon too, kind of what we're looking for, or knowing what supports we need to have in place as kids come back to school and they haven't been together in bigger groups for quite a while, and things that we're maybe looking out for or ready for, or just kind of give me a glance at that maybe.
Sure. Well, we already know that even before the pandemic hit, that we have a lot of students who deal with anxiety on a regular basis. And now, after having been through this portion of the pandemic, being away from school, and then being put back into school where they have to wear a mask and be 6 feet apart, we're anticipating there will be a lot of needs related to anxiety. And so we know that there will need to be small groups, support groups related to that, as well as meeting individual needs for students. We're also anticipating that there will be students who need additional supports related to depression. And this isn't new either. This is something we've seen in the Dane County Youth Survey, as well as all of our own data collection tools. We know that these needs are out there, but we definitely know that they will be exacerbated by the pandemic, the isolation, and now the return. Because honestly, the return is probably going to feel very unfamiliar to a lot of kids, and they will need support in getting through that too. So additional individual counseling, additional groups. I would say that there's a lot of lessons that are being done to help people understand the expectations related to how we treat one another. Because we have spoken about the fact that having your online culture and then being in person, you're recreating that classroom culture. And people recognize that and they plan for it. And that's something we also have to plan for as a school, because we are reestablishing school culture. And then we're doing that, plus you're adding on the layer of, this is the first year that we're officially teaching specifically toward the anti-hate speech policy. We've always held that expectation for our students, but we're teaching more explicitly about why we hold that expectation this year. So all of those things, I think, will be a necessary component to the student services plan moving forward. So Jim and Shannon, if either of you want to expand on that.
Our student services team, we were meeting today and just monitoring data and again, keeping a pulse on where our kids are. We've anecdotally noticed that many of our students who have struggled with mental health the most significantly over our time have opted to remain online, which, is interesting, and also then provides us with challenges in terms of how to continue to monitor and support their learning moving forward as well. We also, our cell coaches have developed resilience toolkits that they're sharing across buildings that teachers can utilize with classrooms, as well as students can access on their own, which I think are really rich and will be important as we move on. And then as we do phase back and groups of students are in buildings, as you've heard, it looks and feels different. There's almost, I've been in 4 high schools now, observing kind of what the school days look like, and it feels smaller, fewer kids in rooms, behind masks, and more subdued. And there's also the opportunity for students that are in those online settings to feel like they're missing out. So we're going to continue to reach out to all of our kids who are online. And that's why it's really important, I think, for our teachers to be able to have those online Google Meets, small groups with online students as well, so that they have those weekly contacts multiple times, and those relationships are still really a critical piece of assessing where students are.
And I would agree with everything that Leslie and Jim has already shared. Those small groups that kids will be in for their online classes and phased restart, I think will be critical. I think it'll help us to really build relationships and kind of monitor students, how they're doing in the transition. Our student services team has talked about doing either like a screener or another mental health check survey of some sort, yet to be determined. Originally, we were looking to do that close to now or early February, but we really wanted to hold off on that till maybe about a month or so after the transition, because we didn't want anxiety about the transition to be clouded by more like longer term or like once you settle in, how are you doing? So we're trying to make a decision about that still of next steps, but we'll be looking to do something hopefully in about a month to 6 weeks to give us another indicator.
And my final question is just about our staff. I mean, I think this slide that you have up really points to the task in front of our teachers in terms of determining in-person lessons and online lessons. So I guess I would just ask, what are the things that we're monitoring with mental health with our staff? And talk a little bit about the importance of Wednesdays for them, that I know that there's been some talk about why we can't have class on Wednesdays, but how important is Wednesdays to our teachers' mental health and their ability to keep teaching in this model?
Thank you for bringing up Wednesdays. Teachers' schedules as they are, there are not very many prep times built in, or not as much prep time as they would need to operate fully in two different models, unless Wednesdays were happening. Because if teachers have as much prep time as they normally would, that would be enough to prepare the lessons in one mode. But for most teachers, we're asking them to prepare lessons in two modes. And that requires significantly more planning than they've ever had to do before. And I would also say what they're doing requires significantly more coordination than they've ever had to do before. So when teachers are in meetings on Wednesdays, for example, a third grade group, it isn't just third grade teachers from one school, it's all third grade teachers across the district who are meeting together, because they want the instruction across the district to have a high level of consistency. And that is something that Wednesdays are allowing us to do. And so not only is it helping us be good now, but it will help us be just as good as we move forward, because we're developing these relationships and we're developing a consistent approach to all subjects across all grade levels in all schools, because we now have 4 schools teaching the same grade levels. And so that is getting trickier as we get bigger. And so it's been a really important part of this process to allow teachers to have that time on Wednesdays to work together in groups to support all that we're asking of them. Now, as far as mental health, I think once again, I'm not saying that we have the answers to this, and I do think that this has been extraordinarily stressful. But I also know, once again, it goes back to relationships, right? And everyone supporting one another, knowing one another as people, reaching out to one another as people, people being able to say, I'm not doing okay, and knowing that your team is going to be there for you. And that's something I think that we are all working on, and the type of culture that we're trying to create every single day with decisions that we make, one where we support each other, because we're all connected.
Thank you. That's all for me.
Leslie, could you go to the phased restart Chevron page? And while you're going to that, I just had 2 short comments. One was, it's nice to be talking about topics that we normally talk about in non-COVID years. So talking about open enrollment and audit proposals and Worthwood's projects. It's a recognition that even amongst the COVID stuff and the unusual circumstances, we got to keep continuing about our operations as normal, and then more importantly, planning for the future, because one of our strengths is we've always been planning for the future. And I know that operating in the present has taken up a lot of time, but we can't lose sight of that as well. I was really gratified to see this chart because we've seen it since before the start of school this year, and our hope was that we would be getting kids back into school at start of second semester without having to go backward on this chart. And so to see us one step away from next steps is really, really cool. Number one. Number two, we haven't had any backwards here, and that's been very important in terms of maintaining an educational consistency in the model. And I know that this phase restart hasn't been fast enough or more inclusive in terms of in school for some folks. And for some folks in the community, it's been too fast for it. But what it did was it put us on a chart that's been consistent. So everybody knows what we're doing, what the monitors and the criteria are going to be for our decision making. And that's helped us plan educationally with our teachers, with our administrators, and with our kids, and with our transportation, so that we're consistent in the delivery of that. So this has been really good. One of the concerns I have is that we're in the middle of January and we've got COVID fatigue, and it's easy to get sloppy and let down our guard in terms of this. And it was, I mentioned Tim with the medical group doing the Panther Pledge, and that's one step toward maintaining that discipline, that we have a goal in sight, and that's to get to that next step. And if we're going to get there, we've all got to be disciplined through a little bit of hard time right now. But if we are, we can take that next step according to the criteria you've outlined, and then we can be longer and more people into school, and we can fill that last chevron in, so that the spring will be, hopefully we'll have that filled in, Leslie, by the first meeting in April and before that, so that I can see that filled in. We'll have more people in there. But it's been a really consistent plan, and I echo what board members have said, is that we're spending a lot of times in meeting, giving you feedback and hearing reports from you, but it's been amazing when we ask questions of you and your administration, how comprehensive we get how comprehensive the responses are, how detailed they are. And it gives us a comfort level that we know that the operational stuff is being handled really well. So thank you. And thank you. Keep thanking your staff for us, because this board really appreciates everything that you guys are doing through this. So,
Every chance I get. Thank you.
yep. So that's all I had. Does that, anybody trigger anything else that we've heard through, last go round?
Yeah, Steve, can I ask a quick question? With the first semester finishing up, I don't know that grading is done necessarily, but you hear some pretty startling news of some big school districts around the country and how failure rates are through the roof. It doesn't sound like we're dealing with much of that.
We aren't, and we'd be happy to present some of that at the next board meeting, so you can see some of the student achievement results from first semester.
Yeah, that would be good, Leslie. Put that on so we can share that with the public. Thank you, Kevin. That's a really good point. Okay. Moving on, anything additional on the superintendent's report, Leslie?
No, you've definitely heard enough from me tonight, so thank you.
All right. That takes us to future agenda, and I'd like to posit that just like we're moving forward in phased restart, I would like to consider that February 8th, we move the board in person. And I've got to work out details with that. I know we have a couple board members will be out of state, but if, well, we're bringing our students back in a limited fashion, that the board starts meeting together as well. And there are going to be some logistical challenges with that, but we'll work through that, okay? So kind of anticipate, unless you hear otherwise, that February 8th will be somewhere at the high school, either in the Innovation Center or in the cafeteria, but Leslie and I will work through that detail. Okay. And then we're gonna talk about the fall and spring sports issue on February 8th. I've got that noted down. The school forest is one. Leslie will have a continuing standing update on your report on the phased restart. And as usual, board members, if you have anything you'd like to have put on the agenda, contact Leslie or me. Tim.
I'd like to just make sure that maybe we all come with, 2 or 3 takeaways from the state education conference last week.
Good point. I forgot to do that.
It was very, very well orchestrated for an event that draws as many people as that draws, and to have all those breakout sessions. It was incredibly well orchestrated. Everything from, taking polls during the meetings to best practices. I heard from quite a number of private schools as well as public education. So I think if we could all just kind of take a look at those sessions that we either did or may want to attend virtually, and come back with 2 or 3 takeaways, I think it'd be great.
Terrific. And I know a number of those sessions are recorded and we can facilitate those. So if somebody saw a particularly good one, that we can route other board members to those. Really good. Tim, then we'll put that on the agenda for the next time. Thanks. All right. Checkout. I don't have anything. Krista? Troy? Tim? You're good? Anna? We're good. Kevin? Heather? All right, we need one more motion.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Call the roll, Katie?
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pinkeritz,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, thanks, everyone. We're adjourned at 9:10. Be safe and